Thank you all for being here. For those of you who do not know me, I am Eddie Weeks, your legislative librarian. Your legislative library is just across the hall here in Suite 804. Please stop by and say hi at any time. I'm there to answer just about any historical question you may have about the legislature, old laws, past legislators, prior legislation, the legislative process, and even what is the story of the Capitol grounds? What a great question. Now, Nashville was named the permanent capital city of this state in 1843, and work began on that Capitol building on July the 4th, 1845. But in between there, the state needed the land on which to build that Capitol building. That hill was not owned by the state, nor was it owned by the city. That changed in 1843. In 1843, Nashville Mayor Powhatan Maxey and a group of citizens bought the land then known as Campbell's Hill from Judge George Washington Campbell. George Washington Campbell was born in Scotland in 1769, came to America in 1772, opened a law practice in Knoxville in 1794, became a member of Congress in 1803, served in the United States Senate, and became United States Secretary of the Treasury in 1814. But how did he get that land? This is the story as told in the WPA Guide to Tennessee. In 1811, a neighbor bought a cow from Judge Campbell and was unable to pay for it. But I'll tell you what, I got a pretty fair rifle gun and I owned old Cedar Knob up yonder. Write my debt off your books and you can have them both. Judge Campbell agreed. So we know the value of that land in 1811 was one cow minus one pretty fair rifle gun. This story is repeated in Tennessee, the Volunteer State, Volume 1 by John Trotwood Moore. An interesting anecdote is told in connection with this property. Many years previous, Judge Campbell had sold a cow and a calf to a neighbor, who subsequently, determining to remove from the country, notified his creditor that a rifle gun and that Cedar Hill was all that he had to give for the debt he owed. The judge accepted the property, thinking that the sum he might be able to sell the gun for would be all he would realize for his cow and calf. So maybe that land was worth a cow and a calf, minus the rifle gun. Anyway, by 1843, Judge Campbell had a house on Cedar Hill, also known as Cedar Knob, and the hill became known as Campbell's Hill and was bought by the city of Nashville for $30,000 in 1843. And the city of Nashville then gave that hill to the state of Tennessee. The Republican banner, November 17th, 1843. The chairman made a report yesterday recommending the selection of Campbell's Hill. The report was accompanied with resolutions for the erection of Capitol on that site and for the reception by the state of the donation proposed by the city of Nashville. Scraps of Nashville's early history from the Daily American, March 17, 1876, put it this way. On Saturday, October 7th, 1843, Nashville was agreed upon by both houses. The Corporation of Nashville bought Campbell's Hill for the State House at the cost of $30,000 and gave it to the state. Which raises an interesting question. Where was the General Assembly meeting before they had that building and those grounds? Well, the General Assembly returned to Nashville in 1827 after spending a decade in Murfreesboro, and 1827 Joint Resolution 25 thanks the owners of Masonic Hall for the use of the respective rooms that the legislature used and that the legislature agreed to pay for the casual damages done to the windows and shutters by the legislature. Now, we don't know what this damage was, But there was enough damage done to the windows and shutters that the legislature agreed to pay for those damages. And an article in the Nashville Republican on October 1st, 1835 says that the rooms in the Davidson County Courthouse have been fitted up for the use of the legislature. So, after years of borrowing rooms, the General Assembly was now ready to build their own place on their own land. On December 27th, 1843, the 25th General Assembly of the state of Tennessee, through Joint Resolution 27, accepted the land gifted by the city and made Governor James Jones in charge of the grounds set apart for the capital of this state on the first day of January, 1844, and declared that the small brick tenement on said grounds be set apart as an office for the Secretary of State. On the 20th of January, 1844, the General Assembly took the land away from the governor and put the Secretary of State in charge of the public grounds set apart for the capital, and ordered that he take proper steps to secure and preserve the same, and that he have leave to occupy the buildings. The top 4 feet of that hill were then removed, blasting down to the limestone beneath. On July the 4th, 1845, the cornerstone of that Capitol building was laid on that hill. But as work began on the building, the state needed more land around it. 1846, Chapter 49, was an act to continue and complete the construction of the State House. Section 3 of this act declared that the purchase of the lots of ground situate and lying in front of the public grounds and intended to be included as part of the same be and the same is hereby confirmed, and the purchase money thereof, being the sum of $8,500, is hereby directed to be paid. So, part of the land was bought by the city and gifted to the state, and the state bought more land around the Capitol. And 10 years later, 1856, Chapter 268, was an act to provide for the completion of the Capitol, purchasing grounds north and west of the Capitol to complete a suitable square for the same, enclosing the Capitol grounds with a suitable fence, and grading and improving the same in a manner similar to the grounds around the national Capitol in Washington, D.C. So, around 1856, a decade after construction began, the state owned enough land around the Capitol and on Cedar Knob to complete a suitable square, which is to be fenced in and modeled after the grounds around the national Capitol. And here we see evidence of those purchases from a marker still on those Capitol grounds. Near here in 1820, the first Catholic church in Tennessee was built. When St. Mary's Cathedral was built in 1847, Holy Rosary Church became St. John's Hospital and Orphanage. The site was sold to the state in 1857. However, those grounds were not exactly square. This is an 1855 plat map showing the Capitol, and here we learn that the area of land was around 520 feet north and south, 599 feet east and west. Construction ended on that building in 1859, but there was still more work to be done to those grounds. 1860, Chapter 130, Section 32, that the board shall employ a competent engineer who shall not be a contractor or interested as such in the work, to estimate the necessary cost of making excavations and fills and doing other work to reduce to proper grade and complete the Capitol grounds as contemplated in the Act of 1855-1856, and to report the same to the board. And to pay for this work, the governor was authorized to issue up to $100,000 in $1860 in 30-year bonds to complete those grounds according to the design of 1855. And that work was to begin in 1861. 1861, Chapter 9, by the 34th Confederate General Assembly was euphemistically called an Act for the Relief of Taxpayers. Among other things, it repealed the $100,000 authorized for the improvement of the Capitol grounds. For the next 4 years, war ruled, and the condition and maintenance of those grounds was of little concern, other than how they would be used by the 6th Ohio Army. And make no mistake, that Capitol and those grounds were used. The holes on these fortifications are intended for cannon. In the aftermath of that war, those grounds, that Capitol, and this city stood in ruin. The Jonesboro Union flag, December 22nd, 1865, the headline, "Lawlessness in Nashville." The Nashville papers teem with chronicles of crime that are nightly perpetrated in that city. It is an adventure of applauded boldness to appear upon the streets after nightfall, and he is esteemed the blessed of fortune who meet up with no plug-ugly demonstration at personal expense. The readers of the Nashville press would infer that the Capitol is a cesspool of the congregated viciousness and depravity of the whole state. Nashville once had an enviable fame for her quiet and honest-minded citizens and their general observance of law. Now she is almost as disreputable for deeds of lawlessness and violence. After the war, 1866, Chapter 44, was an act authorizing the governor to employ a superintendent of the Capitol and the Capitol grounds at a salary not to exceed $125 a month. That it shall be the duty of said superintendent to take care of and preserve the Capitol and all the furniture, fixtures, and stationery within and about the Capitol and the Capitol grounds, and keep the same in good order. 1870, House Joint Resolution 14 turned attention back to those grounds, inquiring into the expediency of having the grounds cleaned and put in good condition, and inquiring into the cost of having the grounds put in thorough repair. We don't have to imagine just how bad those grounds were after that war. And note, for a hill that was once known as Cedar Knob, there is a certain scarcity of cedar. Again, we don't have to wonder what happened to all those cedar trees. They became part of Fort Andrew Johnson. On July the 5th, 1870, 25 years and 1 day after the laying of the cornerstone of that Capitol building, 1870, Chapter 107 was an act to improve the Capitol grounds. That the inspectors of the penitentiary be and they are hereby authorized to improve the Capitol grounds according to the original plans. The problem was those original plans had disappeared in the Civil War. So new plans were needed, and the newspapers of the day took note of what was being planned for those Capitol grounds. The Nashville Union and American, June the 3rd, 1870, as our state legislature is now considering the question of the improvement of the chaotic-looking space around our beautiful Capitol, a few words. Fitness, utility, convenience are primary requirements, the absence of which no beauty of design or decoration can excuse. The contour of the surface of the grounds and its relation to the lines and grades of the circumscribing streets must influence the plans of the architect or engineer in charge. The grounds must be an appropriate setting to their central gem, the Capitol itself, and subordinate to it. in seeking to convert their present stony waste into a pleasant oasis, a helpful breathing space in our busy and dusty city, it is not necessary to render suburban parks a superfluity of the future. It should be laid out with broad paths and well-turfed slopes. Convenient carriage drives should traverse it and carry the visitor to the broad platforms of the building. Agreeably grouped shrubbery should be planted, nor should it be left ultimately deficient in the larger and statelier growth of suitable trees. But the whole should carefully be subordinated to the grand central building. They should be made an agreeable accessory and appropriate setting to their dominant feature. The Nashville Union and American, July 15, 1870, the Capitol grounds, improvement on a magnificent scale, work to begin at once. Much has been said and written upon the subject of the improvement of the Capitol grounds, but not until now has there been a tangible basis of encouragement as the speedy undertaking and accomplishment of the work. The work is of great magnitude, involving both good taste and patient engineering skill. The grounds are to be enclosed with a massive stone fence of the same material of which the building is constructed. This stone fence is to be surmounted with a tasteful and substantial iron fence, with entrances in front of each wing of the building. A beautiful, grand, and circular drive will be opened around the inner enclosure, the entrance to which will be from Park Street through a massive iron gate in imitation of sculpture. Within this circular drive, the grounds will be laid off in beautiful grass plots and profusely decorated with every variety of native growth, shrubbery, flower, and evergreen. Bordering the walks and fountains, and interspersed at proper intervals, there will also have every specimen of stone, ore, and mineral known to be the natural product of our prolific state. Thus combined with the most beautiful design and attractions, the grounds will present, as it were, a miniature cabinet or exhibition of all the native products, mineral and vegetable, abounding in our forests and groves and embedded in our hills and valleys. But who was to design those grounds? The Nashville Union and American, April 14, 1871, John Bogart of the firm Bogart, Collier and Company, landscape architects and engineers, arrived in the city yesterday and took rooms at the Maxwell House. The firm above mentioned were the architects for some time at Central Park in New York City and are represented to be equal to the very best in the whole country. And John Bogart's full report was printed in the Nashville Union and American on July the 4th, 1871. Gentlemen, we present to you the design for the improvement of the grounds surrounding the capital of Tennessee. In accordance with your instructions, the intent of the design has been to effect an artistic, elegant, and appropriate development of those grounds, suitable to the structure which they surround and consistent with their use as the public garden of the state. Did you notice what changed? Instead of being based on the national capital, the grounds are now to be a public garden, a park for the state. The report continued. The motives of the design submitted to you may be concisely stated as follows. First, to give convenient access to the Capitol for both carriages and pedestrians. Second, to add such architectural, landscape, and garden-esque effects as the grounds may properly permit. Third, to give opportunities for pleasant promenades, for quiet resort, for social congregation, and for public meetings. Fourth, to exhibit, as may be practicable, both the flora of Tennessee and its geological and mineralogical characteristics. Of course, not everything went as planned. The Nashville Union and American, December 3rd, 1871, reported, "We regret to see a disposition on the part of the legislature to stop the improvement of the Capitol grounds. They have been an eyesore for the last 15 years. In their present unfinished condition, with their hillocks of dirt and stone and holes, they present the appearance of an Indian burying ground and only furnish hiding places for loafers and evildoers, thus rendering them a public nuisance." But the work eventually continued. 1873, Chapter 37, was an act to complete the Capitol grounds. The superintendent for the improvement of Capitol grounds is hereby directed to prosecute to the earliest completion the improvements on the Capitol grounds as set forth in the plan known as the Bogart Plan. The Tennessee State Capitol Historic Structure Report on page 46 describes the Bogart Plan as essentially conventional plan that is chiefly notable for the treatment of the steep site and the series of graded sidewalks and stairs provided for ascending the hill to the Capitol. It was intended that the Capitol site be developed as a pleasure grounds for the public. Hence the multitude of curving walkways, fountains, and the ponds. A pleasure grounds for the public. Unfortunately, some people took that phrase way too literally. The Nashville Union and Dispatch on July 28, 1867, calls the Capitol grounds a trysting place for roués and their paramours. Capitol Hill were at the miniature Eden it was designed to be when the first stone was laid for the magnificent edifice we call our State House, would hardly be a place of more general resort than it is now. Rough and broken as its sloping surface has become, and grim and ghostly as its deserted fortifications appear by the pale moonlight of a soft summer night. Strange stories are being whispered of the place and some of the promenaders. Not all there is innocence and purity any more than in any other resort. Black sheep have crept into the flock, and many a sad tale of sorrow and shame may well be traced to that beautiful locality for its origin. It is to this place that the accomplished roué leads his victim, and here many a frail one is lost forever, and the happiness of many a home is blighted. If you can't tell what the writer's trying not to say, people are having sex on our Capitol grounds. This was not the pleasure grounds they were intended to be. On a much happier note, the Nashville Union and American, April 16, 1873, reported that the trees which were planted out on the Capitol grounds last fall and winter are coming in full leaf. And the prospect is that most of them will live and flourish to gladden the eye of future generations. It was a wise act on the part of the last legislature to order the completion of the Capitol ground improvements, and a few years' time will suffice to demonstrate that wisdom. The Nashville Union and American, November 21st, 1873, reported that the Capitol grounds are still under improvements. The building of the stone wall around the base of the hill still goes on. Parts of the grounds have been prepared and sown in grass, which is coming up and looking very pretty. A magnificent hill that will be, when smoothed and carpeted with grass. And 9 years after that 1873 article, 1882 Joint Resolution 6 created a joint committee to inquire what repairs were needed to the gates of the Capitol grounds in order to protect said grounds and the shrubbery and grass from destruction by stock. That's livestock wandering the streets of Nashville. Nashville was still a very agrarian place. But it wasn't just livestock on those grounds. August 22nd, 1893, the Nashville Daily American reported that a 2-foot-long alligator was placed in the North Pool yesterday, and he will be joined by another today. Someone thought it was a good idea to set loose 2 alligators on our Capitol grounds. And while you cannot have a souvenir of the people who had sex on those grounds, you might be able to find a souvenir alligator with the Tennessee State Capitol engraved on its back, a reminder of when alligators wandered the Tennessee State Capitol grounds. A decade later, the General Assembly was ready to make certain those grounds stayed in good shape, despite the alligators and people maybe having sex. 1899, Chapter 198, created the office of Superintendent of the Capitol and gave him responsibility on everything within and about the Capitol grounds, including presumably the alligators. And the superintendents used those powers. The Nashville American, April 19, 1903, Superintendent Porter of the Capitol has been persistently annoyed of late by the disarrangement of the benches on the grounds by nocturnal visitors. The Capitol and grounds will be lighted up until 10 o'clock. Visitors must then retire and the gates will be closed and none allowed within the enclosure but state officials. No one must walk upon the grass, pluck the flowers, break or injure the shrubbery, move the seats or benches from their positions, or skate or cycle upon the esplanade of the Capitol. The Nashville Tennessean, May 16, 1907, brought happier news. Recognizing the necessity for a park or place of outing for the little folk of the downtown district during the heated term, Superintendent Sawyer of the state capitol has decided that just as soon as warm weather comes, the Capitol grounds will be thrown open to the public until 11 o'clock each night. The grounds will be well lighted, and the night watchman will be on hand at all times to preserve order. It is the intention of Superintendent Sawyer to make the Capitol an attractive place of recreation at nights for the people of the city, and particularly the children who live in the downtown district. And this idea of the Capitol grounds being a public park stuck around. A few months later, the Nashville American, October 13, 1907, an ideal system of parks for Nashville. The Capitol ground is a beautiful park. Under the control of the legislature several seasons, the flowers have been set artistically and are well cared for, making the grounds very attractive. With entrances on every corner, it is of easy access. The situation is central and high, the outlook inspiring and almost limitless. At night in summer, it is cool and comfortable. The Greek temple in the center is worthy of adoration. Of course, not everything went well. The Covington Leader, May 10, 1907, reported that the gates of the state capitol will be closed at 11 o'clock at night and no admittance will be permitted to any but state officials. All capitals and buildings of states are adopting similar orders as a safeguard. War on Germany had been declared days earlier, on April the 4th, 1917. And those Capitol grounds then watched their First World War. And after that war, 1921, Public Chapter 48 was for the acquisition of property adjoining or facing the state capitol to the north, east, and west side thereof for the extension of the Capitol ground. The War Memorial Building, the World War I Memorial Building, would be built to the south of the Capitol on land owned by the city. And 40 years later, the World War II Memorial Building would be built to the west of the Capitol on land owned by the state. And at about that same time, a new building was also built to the east of that Capitol on land purchased by the state. And the story of that building would make a good topic for another Lunch and Learn. The 1939-1940 Blue Book, the last one before America joined World War II, contains this map and this description of those Capitol grounds. The Capitol, situated on the crest of the hill, is surrounded by spacious grounds which have been terraced. Attractive walkways, combined with easy steps, traverse the grounds and make the building readily accessible to pedestrians. A winding drive, which circles the Capitol, accommodates vehicular traffic. And on the grounds are several monuments and historical markers. Occupying the center and larger part of the East Capitol grounds is the Parterre Garden, which is dominated by the equestrian statue of Andrew Jackson. Walkways and two circular flower beds set the former lines of the garden. To the north of the Capitol are two greenhouses and the powerhouse. And in the northeast section is the Polk Tomb. A little over a decade after that 1939 Blue Book entry in the 1950s, as a part of the Capitol Hill redevelopment project, the entire north slope of Capitol Hill was regraded, resurfaced, and redone. The park, ponds, pleasure grounds for the public, and public garden for the state became parking spaces for executive branch employees. But those grounds still had stories to tell, including this one from the Nashville Banner, March 15, 1961. What does a banner photographer see in a day's stroll downtown? Staffer Bob Ray saw a recess, actually a very large hole, on the grounds of the state capitol caused by recent rains. Bob avers it was almost hollow enough to drop the Capitol building therein, and designed a montage to qualify his pictorial point. Of course, we all know that winter snows and spring rains still do a number on those Capitol grounds, and still cause the occasional sinkhole to this day on that hill. And while none of these holes are anywhere near big enough to hold the Capitol, there's still a reminder of times past and all the mysteries deep beneath that Capitol and all the secrets those grounds still hold. And remember that no matter how much work is done to those Capitol grounds, they'll never be finished. They'll just be made ready for the next renovation. And so, the next time you're looking up at that magnificent building on the hill, take a moment to look down at the ground. Think about what all those grounds have been through. Think of those grounds as the downtown park, as the public garden of the state, and as the pleasure grounds for the public. And yes, think of people having sex on those grounds and alligators wandering around them too. And think of the time that those grounds were worth one cow minus one pretty fair rifle gun. And ladies and gentlemen, that's all of my time. Thank you for your time.